What it is, y'all, it is your old boy Pilk, and I know I'm a little bit late covering this topic, but I think it's pretty important to actually get into this, and I really meant to drop this on Saturday, but one thing led to another. It wasn't actually dropped, so hopefully this gets to as many people as it can, because I know a lot of people miss out on this when it happens. So let's talk about it real quick, okay? First things first, know that not only do you get daily rewards for running Record Buster each and every day, and now we're going to get some coins for it too. There's also a coinage here that you need, that basically you acquire by collecting 100 million damage in a single run in Record Buster. Now, a lot of people just immediately fluff that off, say, it's not possible, whatever, I'll give my 25 million and walk on. But trust me, this is actually quite feasible. Now, the one thing you want to understand about Record Buster is the harder the difficulty you run, and I'm going to run a level 6 difficulty, the harder the difficulty you run, the better your points are going to be. Now, there's two ways to go about this. Number one, you can play it safe, run like a level 3 or level 4 with a crazy maximum broken team, build a good skill flow, auto run it, get your points and walk away. Or, if you have some teams that maybe you're like +2, +3 or whatever, you could run a level 6 if you build your team well, and I emphasize well. Now, the team I built here, this team is really designed to maximize SA capabilities. So we're going to do a lot of super attacks. We're going to do a ton of super attacks. But while you're looking at the team going, man, that team's insane, it's so like totally max limit broken, all this and all that, Ray is our only healer. We're not using Haruhime, which means we're not getting counter heals. We're not even really getting any mid-turn heals. We're only getting her HP regen. That's it. And 9 times out of 10, she survives. There are turns where she doesn't, but most of the time, she survives. Now, I'll talk about this when I get to that turn, but for now, let's go ahead and jump in and do a quick run. Now, while we're at this, the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to damage test Hyakinthos, just kind of see what kind of damage we get out of him. So, basically, the one thing I will say at the beginning of this, while this run is going to be fairly impressive to some people, it is a far cry and a shadow of what I can actually achieve with this team. Now, I'll discuss it when that happens, but there are some major changes you could make to get even more points, even though basically I'm doing double duty here. We're going to show you how to get, basically show you how to maximize your points on this Record Buster, while also damage testing Hyakinthos. These are two things that normally don't go together. These should have been two separate videos, but we're in a crunch night now. We got to make this content. We got to get it out tonight so this gets in people's hands. Because you've got 24 hours to get that 100 million points out there. So that's just, unfortunately, the way my time is run this weekend. So let's do this, okay? Now, first things first, I'm going to be doing SA Gauge Charge with Line, and then she's going to leave. And I'll explain what's happening turn 2, but literally everybody else is doing their buff stack. That's it. Nothing too crazy there. Now, what's weird on this turn, I want to emphasize this, okay? Now, you don't have to run a wind team. Wind team is optimal. Wind is the only real, I guess, deficit in Finn's defenses. But literally everything else is neutral. So if you have a really killer fire team, especially if you have that the lingerie Tiona, if you've got that team, if you've got that unit, you could kill this and make insane numbers. She is so good. If you've got any kind of good, even like an earth team, a light team would be really good here. Basically, I think the only team that actually couldn't pull this off would be Dark. Dark, I think, is the only team that really has not a good enough buff to actually make this happen. And even then, maybe actually if you are running like the best of the best in the game on level 6, level 6 difficulty like I'm doing, you actually might be able to eke it out still. But most every other team would easily be able to handle this if you just debuff accordingly, okay? So while I am debuffing, if we're going to end here, of course, on our assist side, we've got guard rate down, we've got 1 unit resistance down, we got critical rate down, we got penetration rate down, physical resist, wind resist, and water resistance. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this is a wind team, but I am using a water unit here. But understand I'm not using her for damage. I'm using her skill 1 to get 100% SA gauge charge on this one turn. Now, you don't necessarily need to do that. The only reason I am is because there's not much of a buff or a debuff that I can apply on this turn that isn't going to be completely useless come turn 5. So, really, I'm honestly just focusing on getting at maximum SA. That's really what I'm focusing on more than anything else. All right? So, let's go again. So, we're doing skill 1 with her. Everybody else, we're doing just their general buff stack. Nothing too crazy. Normal everyday stuff, right, guys? We're not really pushing the limits here. We're not doing anything wild. Now, Reveria will take off, and in will come Ray. And this is where we begin to really have to position ourselves in a safe place, because Ray has got to survive. If Ray does not survive to turn 9, it's not possible to do what we want to do. So, let's go ahead and do this. All right? So Ray's going to do Harmonic Flap, and that's going to give us, once again, 33% SA gauge. But that's not going to be terribly important, though she will benefit from that a little bit. We're mostly doing this because this is going to buff Dex and give us 35% HP. HP regen, I should say. That is going to be critical. So we're going to do that, and everybody else is going to do their big hit, with the exception of Hyakinthos. Hyakinthos is going to do his skill 2 again instead of his skill 3, because his skill 3, if you read it, it gives 120% per each target's strength and magic buff. But Finn's not buffed yet. He won't buff until turn 4. So we're going to do skill 2 with him because of how much, number 1, how much the MP cost is of his skill 3. Number 2, because basically his skill 3 is going to hit harder since there's no major buffs on Finn. Now on this turn, we're going to do attunement with Ray. Now that's going to give Ray basically her extra attack. Is going to give us the debuff isn't really going to happen here because we already have the debuff. Remember, Yukina is a counter debuffer, and her debuff is better. But basically, we want to get that little extra attack out. Every single tiny bit, counters, extra attacks, things like that. All of that adds up and adds up quick. So we want to do attunement to get an extra attack out. I know some people say, why don't you buff, basically buff your own buff turns and debuff turns? The thing is, it won't matter, because at the end of this turn, all that's gone. So you buffing it's going to do no good, so we're going to do attunement instead. Everybody else is going to do their biggest hit, including Hyakinthos, because you'll notice that Finn is, it's at the bottom. He has a 150% strength and magic buff. Now, there is something to be said for doing SAs on turn 4, 8, 12, and beyond. And that's because on 4 and 8, you have a one-time chance to utilize that same 150% strength and magic buff. So, if you'll imagine how hard Hyakinthos is going to hit here, and we'll actually slow this down so we can take a look. We're going to compare this to turn 12, and we'll kind of see why here. So Hyakinthos, almost a mil. Almost a million. Pretty crazy stuff there. 800k on a base hit. On a base hit, not an SA. It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. But, like I said, there is a certain benefit to doing SAs here. I've done some runs where that actually is a thing. Just because of what I'm doing here, I'm not actually utilizing it. I want you to know, though, that honestly, for my biggest hits, I think I'm going to change up and do an SA there with Yukina for various reasons. Now, the other reason that we got Hyakinthos attacking on that turn, not only does he get a big attack or get a big buff from Finn's buffs, but he also removes the strength and magic buffs. If you do not remove strength and magic buffs on turns 4, 8, and 12, you are going to die. That 120% buff, he will kill you without question. So you've got to have a really good HP regen or heal. You've got to have really good debuffing, and you've got to make sure you're removing strength and magic buffs. If you do not do all 3 of those, you're not getting to turn 5. But once again, I want to point out, Ray is level 60. Ray has no business surviving to the point she has, and she's golden. So what we're going to do on this turn, we're going to go back with Ray, and we're going to go ahead and rebuff the 33% of SA gauge charge. Remember, all our buffs got wiped out, every last one of them. So we've basically had to start over from scratch. So we're going to start over with that. That's also going to buff Magic Dex and HP Regen, meaning everybody's getting a big buff. Then everybody else is going to go on just their general buff stack once again. Nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary. But, you know, we are just trying to maximize our efforts here to make sure that we, number one, are buffing so we get the most damage. Number two, are maximizing Ray's, I guess, capability to survive. So I'm really hoping she does too, because when she doesn't, it's kind of a pain. All right. So now Ray is going to go in here and do skill 2. Remember, skill 2 buffs are buff turns and debuff turns on the opponent. So basically, she's going to add an extra turn to whatever the buff rotation is. If we go over here to Finn, for example, he's got strength and magic down 45%. At the end of this turn, he's going to use up one of those, so it's going to go down from 3 turns to 2 turns, except we're going to buff that up another 2 turns, so that's actually a turn to 4 turns. It's actually going to grow instead of be chipped away, and this is going to turn to 5 turns instead of 4 turns. Normally this would go down to 2 and that'd go down to 3, but we're going to add 2 to that at the end because of Ray's attack. Everybody else, general buff stack, nothing too crazy. Literally this rotation is almost identical to turn 1. The only thing we've changed up is Ray. That's it. Nothing wild, nothing crazy, just the usual stuff. Now, turn 3, if I go down here, attunement is running out on Ray. When you have 1 turn left on those extra attacks, you got a buff. So, because remember, as I've said a million times, the extra attack, if I go up here to look at her skill, it says +3 actions, low-end magic attack with foe high critical rate. Basically, that always takes place on the next turn. So while I buff it on this turn, it's not going to take place till turns 8, 9, and then we'll have to rebuff again on 10. So it happens on 11 and 12, then rebuff again on 13, so it happens on 14 and 15, so on and so forth. Now, there's another caveat to that we'll talk about, but just to understand the mechanic of how that works, the only exception to that is SAs. When you do an SA, it skips that turn. It has to be an action is considered one of your 3 main skills or just a general attack. SAs don't count to actions, but we'll get to that. Okay, so we're going to rebuff attunement, and then everybody else is going to do their big hit, with the exception, once again, of Hyakinthos, who's going to go back to skill 2. Because remember, Finn has not buffed, so we're going to do it on turn 8, when the buff exists. Because, really, Finn buffs at the end of the turn. So he's got his buffs now. We're good to go. And now everybody's going to go ahead and do their big attack. Now, once again, she's going to do the buff, debuff repetition here, but mostly because that's a good attack. I'm mostly using this to get just a little tiny bit more damage out, not really to buff that because it won't matter. Now, if I did skill 1, it would be kind of a waste because we already have HP regen in play, already have the buffs in play. We don't need that again, and we will actually need it on turn 9. So doing it here, a bit of a waste. Doing skill 2 gets a little bit of damage out. Everybody else, just like last time, big hits, with the exception that this time I'm going to do an SA with Yukina. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is, once again, remember, Yukina has 100% strength stat. So her hit is going to be pretty respectable. Okay? Now, Hyakinthos is going to do about the same thing he did on turn 4, so we don't really need to test it, but a real test is going to be with him on turn 12. So, Lego. Alright? I'm really hoping Ray survives this. This is that rare situation where I'm like, Ray, based on whether Ray gets criticaled, she guarded. Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. I need her to guard, so we're in a great state. If she didn't guard, we might hurt a little bit. So this is perfect. Absolutely perfect. And this is why I said sometimes if you come in here and, you know, maybe she dies in that turn, or maybe she's in like a situation where the next hit is with 100% going to kill her, there's no shame in starting over. I've done it a dozen times, literally. So just be patient with your level 60s if you are running a level 60 on the team like I am. Now, she is going to pay off here in just a couple of turns, but first, let's go ahead and jump in here. Now, She's going to do a Harmonic Flap once again, 33% SA gauge charge, a Magic and Dex buff, along with HP regen. That HP regen is going to be super duper critical. So follow along. Okay, everybody else, general buff stack. The one exception I did here is normally I would do this skill to get the extra attack with Ais. I'm doing this skill because I want her wind attack, or I'm sorry, not her wind attack. I want her strength buff. Why do I want that? You'll find out here in just a quick moment. But first, let's go ahead and jump in. And like I said, everybody else just did the general buff stack. Now, we're going to do a triple SA here. Now, I want to emphasize one thing. While this is tempting, the only reason I'm doing it on this turn is to test Hyakinthos. Doing a triple SA on this turn is a literal waste of time. It would be so much better to save your SAs and do them on turn 13. Reason I say that, number one, you need Hyakinthos or somebody that can remove strength and magic buffs on turn 12. If you're running that Fire Tiona, she actually, I believe her SA actually does remove those. I think, could be wrong, but I think it does. And then you could use her turn 12 and be in the good. But actually, I don't think it does, because I think it has to be her skill that does it. I could be wrong. Somebody correct me in the comments section. But it's not really relevant. You just need to make sure that on turn 12, you remove the strength and magic buffs on your opponent. Yours will stay turns 12, 13, 14, and 15. So, while I'm doing a triple SA here, that is not a way to get maximum damage. The only reason I'm doing this is to see what kind of numbers Hyakinthos can produce to kind of gauge where we want to go with that character. Realistically, turn 13, much better. Turn 12, if you got a unit whose SA removes strength and magic buffs, even like the best. But turn 13 with my team would be so much better. I just want to emphasize that before I go on here. Now, Rei is going to buff wind damage. She's also going to do a magic buff, but she's going to buff wind damage 100%. That's why she's first. Ais does a single target debuff and a wind resistance debuff. So that's why she's going second. Hyakinthos. Hyakinthos is going to do a physical resistance debuff. That's why he's going third. So remember, we did a big buff, we did the double debuff, the single debuff. Basically in order as to who's going to produce the most damage. Now there is some question, I believe Ais actually might produce more damage after Hyakinthos. I haven't tested it, but I think the numbers would be negligible. Now, Hyakinthos did a 1.6 mil there. I didn't see what Ais did, but that's a very respectable hit, especially considering he's just using his base strength buff. So, nothing too wild, nothing too crazy. I'm going to go back to double speed basically until we get to turn 12. The nice part about this is, the way this team is set up, that means all my debuffs are done. Remember, turn 1 we do a bunch of buffs, turn 2 we do a bunch of debuffs. Now, since we've done the SAs, and the SAs have covered all the debuffs we get, I don't really need to do that. I can literally just move on and do our attacks. Now, the only thing I am going to do with Ais is I'm going to go ahead and rebuff her extra attack, because turn 11, while, you know, a good turn to do a little damage on, remember, like I said, double attacks chip away very quickly. So we're going to use that. Also, Rei is run out of attunement. Now, it was supposed to run out last turn, but remember I said that SAs don't count as actions for some reason. So this was left over. What should have been expired on turn 10 now expires on turn 11. We're going to rebuff it. That means that's basically going to stay until turn 14. And I'll be honest, on turn 14, there's just no point in rebuffing it. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that and discuss that. Okay? So, skill 1 with her. Skill 3 with Ais. Remember, we want that extra attack with Ais. And skill 2 for Hyakinthos. Once again, remember, skill 3 requires you have the other buffs. And this is going to debuff guard rate and all that stuff. So it's just going to be a little bit more. Then we're going to do the big hit with Yukina. Now, I am aware that Yukina has the capability to hit absolutely insanely if you do a triple or even better, a quad. Because remember, every time you stack up that SA gauge, they get a little, they hit a little bit harder. I believe it's 10% per SA stack. So I've seen her hit up to 5+ million So understand that while this build is okay for what I'm about to do, it is far from optimal. Though even if you follow this, I feel pretty confident you'll be able to break that 100 mil. So here we go. Ray's going to go ahead and buff the debuff and buff skills. So here we go. All those are going to be replicated. All our buffs. Some of these are getting ready to run out, so we need to rebuff those. Basically, we're going to do her skill 2 almost until the end of the match. All right? Then we're going to do a big hit with Ais, big hit with everybody else. And let's see what Hyakinthos does here. Because remember, this is like his maximum potential or pretty darn close. The only difference is I have a 15% assist debuff, whereas we'd have 20% otherwise. So do bear in mind there's a little bit more damage available in here. But physical resistance is down 60. I think that's the max we can get. Wind resistance is down 50. I think that's still the max we can get. 1 unit resistance is down 25%. The only higher unit would literally be impossible to do in this fight. So in some fights there actually might be the ability to eke out a tiny bit more damage. But still, we're pretty good. Let's see what Hyakinthos does. He should be our first hitter. 1.8. 1.8 million on a skill attack, not an SA. So if anybody asks me, is this unit worth max limit breaking? Hell yes. That attack is absolutely beast. Now, what we really need to do is we need to test on turn 13 and see what Hyakinthos is capable of with his skill 2. Only because we can't use skill 3 anymore. Finn's buffs are gone. Finn's buffs are removed. So let's see what his skill 2 does. But really, like that hit makes up for just about any other deficit. Now I'm going to go ahead and do Yukina Essays from this point on because she's our hardest hitter. There's really no point in doing his skill 3 here only because it requires basically that we have the, that Finn have that buff. So we could do this. This is a super class attack, whereas this is a high class attack. We'll just do the super class attack. It should hit pretty hard. Probably not nearly as hard as the other one hit. I mean, obviously it won't, but it's still going to be good. Okay? Here we go. Then we're going to go ahead and hit with her big hit, and as I said before, we need to make sure the HP regen stays in place, so we're going to do that as well. Now, you'll notice Mortal Rush is running out. You know what? I'm going to actually do Mortal Rush here. Remember, I said that getting the extra attack will do a little bit more. So we're going to do Mortal Rush, and then we're going to focus on the next turn on doing skill 2 and seeing what that does. All right. Excellent. All right. I'm a little worried about Ray, but honestly, like, Ray could croak at this point, and we'd be fine. So long as she gets her skill off on this turn, we're not going to lose anything. These will then be rebuffed basically through this turn and next turn. So long as she gets her skill off, she can croak. We'll be fine. We're still going to get our score. Okay? Now, we're going to go back and do skill 2, this time with Hyakinthos. And we're going to see what numbers we get out of this. Because remember, all the debuffs are still in place, and the 150% strength buff is still in place as well. So, we should still be able to get some really good numbers out of this. Now, we are going to SA with Yukina, but that's just simply to get, damage numbers. And remember, I want to point out, she did a 2.7 mil. I didn't see what his numbers were. His numbers got overlapped. I think maybe it was close to a mil there. I don't know. Let's check on the next turn. So I want to point out, though, that Yukina's hit was only 1 million more than Hyakinthos' skill. It is rare to see a skill actually hit that hard. So I'm going to do his skill 2 one more time, and this time paying really close attention to see what happens here. So we're looking for turbulence. So it's 0.5 mil. It was 0.5 mil. Not crazy. There are bigger hits that are actually committed here. So it's not the end of the world, but, once again, Him hitting for half a mil on a skill isn't bad by any stretch. Him hitting for 1.8 mil on a skill is insane. That actually says it's my high score, but there's a lot more damage out there. So hopefully now you understand not just how Record Buster works. Hopefully you're sold in Hyakinthos too. But hopefully now you've got a good idea of what you need to do to go in there and get your 100 mil as well. If you have any questions, post them in the comments section. I want to make sure everybody's able to at least get off their 100 mil. And bear in mind, my Ray even survived to the end. Normally she croaks on turn 14. She survived a level 60 unit without Haruhime, survived to the very end. No excuses, guys. Go work on those teams. Get your 100 mil. Get in there. If you need help, there are 2 Discords down below. I promise you, if you cannot find the help in those 2 Discords, you're simply not trying. There's so many people out there that would love to help you and would absolutely love to help you get these coins and help you succeed. If you want to know more about the coins, I'll put a link to the video in the description down below that describes them all. But for now, that's going to be this video. Like, comment, share all the good stuff. Catch you all in the next one.